Sarah Kirk-Sell is, as I mentioned, a senior scholar at the Center for Health Security and an associate professor in the Department of Environmental Health and Engineering at the Johns Hopkins Bloomberg School of Public Health. She also leads the Region 3 Center for Public Health Preparedness and Response. Nicole mentioned the other centers across the country. And her work in particular focuses on preparedness, public trust, and risk communication. She's led the work on the Trust in Public Health project, which you'll hear about here, and the practical playbook to address health rumors associated with that work, both funded by CDC. Now you have a really good fun fact to ask her questions about, but I know that you are here to hear more about her work in communication. So I'll turn it over to you, Sarah. Go for it.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Racham and Nicole, for inviting me here. You have such an amazing staff. I think that this has been such a well-run conference. I just want to say thank you for having me here and this opportunity for us to all get together. So, an interesting fun fact about me, not the Olympian one, is that I actually work remote for Hopkins, and I live in Bremerton, Washington. It's not really that long of a commute for me. Racham asked me to present at this conference. I didn't even really look to see what I was doing. I just said, yeah. And then yesterday I found out it was the keynote. She sent me all the stuff. I just was like, Racham, you asked me to do this. I'm going to do it. But I love seeing all of our Kitsap and former Kitsap people here. And the really great thing about what you're doing here is that you're bringing us all together. We get to, it's a small world. We know a lot of people. I think that Chelsea, actually, I've harassed her before about other Hopkins work. So like all of these people who we know kind of tangentially, or sometimes we run across paths, it's such an important thing to be able to get together. So thank you for doing that. Now, before we get started, I have an icebreaker. And what I like to know is, what is the wildest public health rumor you have had to deal with? So we have a mic that's running around the room, but I want to hear it. We're going to have a vote at the end. No, I'm just joking because it depends on time. But I want to hear the wildest public health rumor that you guys have had to deal with. We have one right here.
Oh, my name's Angie Cadwell from Walla Walla County. It's a pretty common rumor, actually, that the COVID shot gave you like a microchip in your arm. I am also a licensed veterinarian in the state of Washington. I microchip animals for a living. The needle's roughly the size of my pinky. You will know if you're getting a microchip. And those are very not good technologies. We can scan it. It gives us a number, no name, no information. It does not transmit anything. You cannot follow your animal GPS. So it's a fun conversation to have. And then also my sister works in imaging, and people were worried about the magnetism of their vaccine in the MRI, and she has not ripped off any arms.
That's good. That's good. That's some good ones. I think we saw some over here.
Not sure how this came about, but somehow it was like this soapy residue that entered a river system and was causing mind control.
Mind control is a popular theme. Mm-hmm. And we have one more, and we'll take one more in the back.
Just one word, chemtrails.
Oh yes, chemtrails. We've all had to deal with that. One, too. I will say these are all really good ones. One time, one of these presentations, and people share their craziest ones with me. They were changing their street lamps in their town from the kind of the regular to these LED ones. And so they thought that they were using the special light to track using the microchips, but then that was tied into the lights. But there's something interesting there, because it was tied into something that was actually happening, right? They could see this other thing. And a lot of times these rumors, the hardest part about them is that there's something in them that's actually true. And now you got to deal with all of that, because they're like, but the evidence is right there. So pretty tricky to deal with. Now, I want to sort of emphasize, this is a new problem we've been having to deal with recently, but it's a problem as old as time, right? This is actually from 1930, Health in Pictures. There's your fact check right there, actually, because I thought this is way too convenient. It's so perfect. It can't be real, but it was. And so, this is like, we've got the same problem. We've got these same problems, but we have a new information environment. we have this digital information environment that makes it much easier to spread these rumors. And I do say rumors because a lot of times for folks who have to deal with some political issues when dealing with misleading information, it can be wiser to use the word rumor than misinformation, because the politics have sort of turned the word misinformation into sort of a tag to say, like, these guys are liberals and they're just against us, and we're not. And this is a apolitical issue, and we're going to talk about it in a little bit. But for that reason, we've actually turned to the idea of using rumor more often than misinformation. Now, we also have to deal with this infodemic, right? A rapid, large-scale spread of health information and misinformation through a variety of informational channels. And really, this overabundance of information, people don't know. They can't choose. They can't really easily choose what's accurate and what's not. And people just sort of start jumping to these sort of using these heuristics, these sort of mental shortcuts to determine for themselves what they should believe and what they don't believe. And a lot of times that's related to their identity, group identity, these types of things that sort of allow them to not have to think too hard about that moment when they're parsing information. Now you can see this is a slide or a tweet, I guess. One of my analysts found this in one of our data sets where we were actually like evaluating it for misinformation. He was like, I found you, Tara, you're in there. This is, we had an exercise in October 2019, it had a coronavirus in it. And I was talking about misinformation in the exercise. So it's like super meta when we found that in our Twitter data set. So I always have to show that. Now, really when we think about misinformation, really what it comes down to, we need to communicate effectively, and rumors and misinformation make that difficult. But no matter what the politics are, people need and they want information to protect themselves and their families, right? So really, we need to go beyond just the idea of providing information. What we need to do is we need to ensure uptake and belief and build trust for now and the future. So it's really about making it so that the information can be actually accessed, and I'm stumbling over this word because it's not really just about accessibility, like can you read it in the right language, but also accessibility in the sort of the mental constructs that people have about how they see the world. And we have to think about that and be empathetic to that, because when we sort of just say like, you don't get it and you don't understand, we lose our ability to communicate really effectively. So the other thing we really try to think about with our team is anticipating different types of rumors. I think by now, probably you can think back to the rumors that you've had to deal with, and there's a lot in common with those rumors, right? So we can think then and we know our communities, we know the things that they're concerned about, and we can start thinking ahead about what rumors we might anticipate in our communities in the next disaster. You can say like, okay, a lot of times these have to do with these social cultural narratives, and I know the narratives that are really running strongly through my community, this is gonna be something I'm gonna have to address. Maybe it's really just about scapegoating or some of these sort of desire for certainty, right? People want to know, and being able to deal with uncertainty is a very difficult thing. So, thinking ahead, what can we expect? I think this is very important. And then when we think about our interventions, we actually have a lot of interventions that we can use. And you can see like the little pictures of my team members who really worked on this and led that work. But you can see the interventions can occur on different levels, right? This is our 4IFAC model where we have interventions at the information level, right? Where we're thinking about if we should amplify factual information, debunk, that sort of thing. If we want to intervene at the individual level, right? Where we try to inoculate people or make the individual more resilient to this misleading information. If we can intervene at the interpersonal or community level, where we're trying to get more community engagement and these trusted messengers, or at that institutional level, this can be harder to do, policy and legislation, that sort of thing. Maybe it's not just one of these that's the right intervention. Maybe it's a constellation of imperfect solutions that we can use to sort of move forward and help people get sort of through this sort of rumor-ridden landscape. So a couple of resources that I wanted to share with you and talk you through today, because I thought, well, should this talk be sort of just didactic, me telling you stuff, or you guys are all practitioners. You want tools, hopefully, I think. And I think that I'm going to walk you through a few tools that we've built that I hope will be helpful to you. This is actually some of this is what we're doing in Region 3. And so, maybe something that you'd be interested at some point also. So this is a website that we've built, thinking about trust in public health. There's a lot of different resources on there, like some videos. We have a great video from Seattle-King County. Thank you, Meredith, for letting us have conversations with your team on that. But we also have from other folks who have volunteered to tell their stories, and then some videos to walk people through if that is your style. We have a checklist to build trust. Now, this is something that we think about, like, okay, if we're going to try to build trust from our public health level, what do we need to do? And so we sort of have walked through different sort of things that you can use to check off the box, or you can go to your institutional leadership and say, like, I really think that this one thing is really important, sort of use it in different ways. But the way we broke that out, and I think something to think about if you're, looking at, all right, trust in my community, how are we going to go about this? There are some pieces that you need to have internally, right? That the checklist goes through these internal operations. What do you need to have just yourself before you can go on? I mean, obviously funding, right? The right personnel, people who are from the communities that you're trying to speak to, those types of things. Having those connections with the community, that community engagement piece, so important. Establishing opportunities with secondary messengers. So, right, how many people do you think follow your health department's Facebook page? Not really that many, right? But the health department's other messengers pick up these messages that come out of the health department, and they carry it forward. So they're the secondary messengers, and I think that we need to sort of, the part of that we emphasize here is that these secondary messengers, whether they're informal, right? So, this influential sort of family member who's going to share all this information on their WhatsApp group, or if it's more formal secondary messengers with these formal partnerships that you've built with community organizations. These are key towards getting messages out and building that trust. And then we have this fourth piece about anticipating misinformation and loss of trust in a public health emergency. And fifth, we just have, creating meaningful and accessible messages. If you're a comms person, I think this should probably be sort of generally what you already do. If you are sort of building out your comms group, this can be very helpful, a helpful resource. But I want to spend the most time today just talking about the playbook for addressing health rumors, right? This is really a guidance towards thinking about how are we going to address rumors in our community, and really just what are the tools, templates, examples that we could use. But the thing I want to emphasize with this is that there's no perfect solution for misinformation, misleading information, rumors. This is something that takes a long time. As many of you know, talking with aunts or uncles or other folks who you come across who believe misleading information, a lot of times that first contact is not going to convince them, right? It's an ongoing conversation that we need to have with our communities, with these individuals, whoever it is, that preserving that contact, building that trust is really one of the most important things for moving forward through misinformation. So I do have a QR code here for you. If you want to access it, I'll pause here. It'll bring you to the webpage, and then you can click on the PDF or whatever you want. This is actually, when we first did this, this is actually an old slide. I pulled it from an old slide deck, but it has the title wrong because about, I would say like 5 months ago, we went through this whole playbook and we revised everything to say rumors or misleading information. We took out misinformation because we felt like the title was preventing people from being able to use this in the scenarios that they wanted to use it in. So we've actually revised this. And so, sorry for the old slide. This is the new title on it. But really what this talks about is preparing for health-related rumors. If you haven't gotten that theme yet, that's one thing that I keep talking about. Deciding when to act to address rumors, because we can't boil the ocean, right? We've got limited time. We only want to address the rumors that are right for us to address. Determining which actions to take to address rumors. developing messages to address rumors, and gathering feedback on those messages. The evaluation part is the hardest part, honestly, just because it's really difficult to do in the communication space. But if we think about how do we set ourselves up for success before rumors spread, do we have the right team members? Or do we have those connections with the communities? It's not as good to go after these connections with the communities during the disaster. These connections should be built ahead of it. Knowing your audience, do we have social listening that allows us to identify these rumors that we need to address? And then are we able to answer audience questions and concerns quickly? Because if we can get to questions and concerns quickly, those are the easiest to deal with, right? Much harder to deal with these sustained growing narratives with increasing potential to cause harm, right? Further on, much harder, we have less influence, more opportunity to cause harm. So if we can get at it earlier, that can be something that can be very helpful. Now, when you're deciding to address rumor, this is kind of gonna be tiny writing, but you can see it in the playbook. We really want to think about our goals, what influences our decision to respond, and then decide whether you're going to address the rumor. So this is a way to think about like criteria, like what are our criteria for how serious this is? Is it spreading far? Is it super harmful? These things can help us understand, okay, is it worth it to act? Capacity to act. I mean, if you've got one person doing all of your comms and they're busy doing everything else, then maybe you don't have the capacity to act. So this is something to think about. You know, is there political buy-in, that sort of thing. And then thinking about the potential consequences, because every action we take, we can create downstream consequences. And so we don't want to amplify the misleading information. We want to think about, you know, what are there political ramifications? These are things that in the real world, we do have to deal with, even though we wish we didn't have to deal with the political ramifications and all that. That's just a fact of life. So putting that into sort of the mix of when we're deciding whether to address a rumor, pretty important. So this is sort of just the decision-making process. But then once you've decided to address the rumor, then you can move on to like, okay, what kind of action are we going to take? Do we want to? First thing we need to do is identify the type of misinformation that's spreading, and think about who are our priority audiences and what are our goals for them. I think a lot of times we forget to think about what do we want people to actually get out of the thing we're telling them? What is the goal that we want to have coming out of this communication process? Choosing an action approach, I'll walk you through that. And then the communications channels and trusted messengers that we're going to send these messages through. You know, how are we going to actually match those channels with our audiences? And then the next steps, the strategic framing of the message that needs to match the communications channel, right? You're going to do something different in your press release, obviously, than your TikTok. Although I don't know if you guys can actually use TikTok. I wasn't able to. I had to take TikTok off my phone because I had a CDC contract and it was like not allowed. So I don't know if you guys can use TikTok. But then the last thing, creating and disseminating your message using good practices. So, you know, when we think about, okay, what kind of rumors do we have? Let me just check the time here. Okay, what kind of rumors do we have? You know, are they thinking about safety of approved or unapproved interventions? Are we thinking about severity, trustworthiness of your organization? You know, these are different types that we can think about, and addressing the type can help us sort of figure out, okay, what are we going to do here? How are we going to deal with it? And then our audiences, right? Are we thinking about, and these are audiences that are organized kind of by like different goals. So if your goal is to increase awareness of accurate health information, you might have a broader audience. If you're trying to increase people's ability to detect false information, you might more be thinking about general audiences and people disproportionately impacted by rumor. And then this harder part, like if you want to increase understanding of a factual alternative, these are more difficult folks to get to, the people who are spreading the rumors, people most likely to believe the rumors. So that's a more difficult audience, but sometimes it can be very valuable to jump in there pretty quickly. When we're taking action to address rumors, I think that there are a couple of things to think about here. Do we want to focus on amplifying accurate information? It's really sort of the things on the far side, the left side are, I think, a little bit more, I wouldn't say they're easier, but they're something that's a better or easier first step. And then you can move along, and these take more resources and time. but like filling information voids, pre-bunking, inoculating, those sort of things. But if we move towards improving health and science literacy, this is really like moving towards the behavior change that we kind of want to see when we think about, the behavior of believing misleading rumors. We would love to see better health and science literacy, increasing population resilience. But obviously, that's a pretty tall order as we ask people to invest, public health departments to invest in different things. Resiliency is the holy grail, but sometimes what we have to do is we just need to focus on debunking, refuting, amplifying accurate information. And if that's all that can be done, that totally makes sense. When we're also thinking about taking action, there's some strategic ways that you can use to frame your message. And that really depends on the population, the audiences that you're working with, what works in your community, right? Should we use moral reframing? Aligning your messages with your target audiences, motivations, and moral values, right? Like, do we try to align with a core belief? That's often a good way to do it. Like, I agree with you that we all want to keep our kids healthy. Like, that's my top priority in my life. Going from there, or is there something, maybe the health consequences framing, right? Appealing to the health-related consequences, the things that people need to do, or like they might get sick, or they might not be able to go to work, that sort of thing. It really depends on the audience, but you can think about the different ones that you can use. And then we think about, okay, now we've got it down. We're going to create and disseminate our messages using good practices. Now, I think the funny thing here, I'll say, we have to have these succinct action items, right? We want to give people things to do. We want to use plain language. Those are really core things. My team is super into this culturally sensitive humor. I am not a funny person, so I would never do that. But I would say if you're funny or you have a funny person on your team, which I have funny people on my team, they're like really good at this. They create all kinds of stuff and I'm like excited about it, but I was like, I could never do this myself. So it really depends on like, if you can do it well, that's a great way to go. I think Baltimore City did it well during the pandemic, but man, that requires some like certain skill sets that I don't have. So, something to try if you've got it. And then even if you can't take action, there are some things to do, right? So maybe you hopped through, you went to step one, decided to take action, and you were like, no, can't do it today. Well, there are other things that you can do, right? You can leverage your strategic partnerships, amplify those trusted voices, attend community outreach events, and then track the consequences of not taking action. Later, you may decide, this has gotten to the point where I really need to do something. So that's when you may come back and say like, okay, well, let's get going on this. I think that's not something to be ashamed of. If you find out later, I think I do need to address this. I think we can't always be everywhere at once. And then this last thing, evaluating messages. So this is really like, can you conduct user testing, or can you co-create messages with the community that you want to be reaching out to? Can we, if you've got a partner who's going to help distribute your message, can they help create the message? That can be very helpful. And then they can test whether those messages are appropriate for that community. Can you track how well your distributed your message was, who it reached? Some of these Facebook and social media tools are very handy, but it's a little biased, right? Like if you're like, oh, well, everyone who looked at my Facebook post liked it. Well, like who's following you? Mostly it's like, right? Like it's a little bit biased there. And then asking partners about their thoughts on your message, its impact on their target audience, right? Those are important. If you have more time and resources, there are a number of things to do, right? You can do a little more methodical message testing. That a lot of times takes a lot more than we've got. So, it's sort of just an optional thing that we have there. And then final thoughts. I think this is funny because this is like my congressional testimony in March of 2020. And I think the crazy thing here is that we're all there in front of Congress in a big group, and it's during the pandemic and no one was wearing masks because the science changes, right? This is the hardest thing to deal with in communication. We've got uncertainty, we've got changing guidance. So really like that humility about like, here's what we know, here's what we don't know, here's what we're doing to figure it out. That information may change. I really appreciated the Washington State West Coast or sort of Western State Coalition I saw the slides on Facebook, and the last slide said, like, this information might change. Stay tuned for if something changes, we'll let you know. I was like, thank you. We definitely need this kind of humility. It's very important. Anticipating that loss of trust and the spread of rumors, preparing for that, grounding communication and transparency and trust, and like I said, being willing to say what we don't know. So that's it. I made it under the 40-minute time. So now I've got like 13 minutes to chat, share your stories. If you have actually done an effort to combat misinformation, I think everyone can hear about it, but I'll take your questions or whatever. Thanks.
Yeah, thanks for that. You know, speaking of just the humility of public health in some of the space, this has been something that I know my executive leadership team at the Department of Health in Washington has been really trying to get a little better handle on. And this was around fluoride. So this is a fluoride kind of space. But often in public health agencies, we also have a set of biases that push us into certain information space, right? And in this case, it's sort of thinking about the role of fluoridated water. That was kind of where this is coming from. But when we take a step back and we really begin to unpack, there's a lot of nuance there, and things do change. Like they said with the Western States Coalition, things may change. And it puts us in a different spot. But kind of my question is probably on that interface between the actual communications and the types of leadership strategies to drive that kind of humility in answering or responding to those kinds of public health issues with communications that demonstrates that humility.
Yeah, that's such an important question. And I think the thing that really I've been thinking about recently, and I forgot to mention when I said I live in Bremerton, I'm the health board chair there for their health board. So I get to see some of the sort of decision making and sort of in real time. And when we think about that leadership, when we need to show that humility, I think the most important thing is listening, right? That we listen and we actually accept what people are telling us. And sometimes I think our community might tell us, hey, I know the science, but I just don't want fluoride. And in some cases, we might have to just take the no for an answer. And we may have to reprioritize in some other ways. I mean, that's a little bit of public health. Like, I feel like I can't say that in a public health room. But sometimes I do wonder if we have to sort of say, like, okay, I hear you. I hear you and I hear your concerns. I'm happy to continue having this conversation, but I'm not going to force you. And I wonder if some of the loss of trust that we've had in the last few years is because people felt they didn't have a voice in their personal decision making because they didn't agree and they couldn't do anything about it. So I feel a little like, oh, did I just say the wrong thing? But that's something that I've been thinking about recently.
Super appreciate the talk. Brian Karras, Washington State Department of Health. We had during COVID times essentially unlimited budget for communications, and we could buy primetime television spots during the run up to Thanksgiving when television was the most expensive it could be. Getting real information out, investing in a well-tested message. We don't have those kind of budgets anymore. How do we continue, or do we prioritize that kind of communication and dissemination of the truth over maintaining some of the core science, or what is the balance?
Yeah, so this is a tricky question too, and something that we held focus groups around the country asking them sort of like, and it was with public health folks, and then it was with their local community partners, right? And so this is a little bit similar. They were like able to pay people like Univision or whatever to run these ads, and then the money runs out. And so like we talked to the community orgs, and they're like, well, go get more money. And I was like, well, there's no more money to be had. So what are some other ways that we can sort of bring in our partners where we can get these messages out? And so are there ways that we can do something for them that makes them feel like this relationship is not just a one-way street? So like, do we show up at Healthy Kids Day for the Y and they're willing to put out a pamphlet for us or something on their front desk? You know, are there sort of these sort of give and take relationships that we can have rather than always asking people to do something for us? I think that's valuable. Now, when it comes to like running ads during prime time, probably not right now. We're not in a public health emergency. You know, I think we got to, you know, recognize the moment and when the spend is important. In the back corner over here.
Great talk, thank you. Dennis Hill, Oregon State University. You used a phrase, and I was just wondering if you could expound on it and what you mean if you had any examples. Disproportionately impacted or susceptible to rumors. Can you give examples of how you've identified that, or how you look at those populations and what that looks like?
Yeah. So I'll give you an example. Anyone who's had, you know, when your kids are first born and you're up in the middle of the night and you're like rocking them and you're like, oh my gosh, could you just go to sleep? There's some problem. You're Googling it. And all of a sudden you've run into like you know, a message boards that's telling you all kinds of crazy stuff about whatever. I do think there are times in your life or there are certain rumors that can disproportionately impact some folks. So like young parents can be pretty susceptible to rumors about like childhood whatevers. And, you know, I think you can sort of walk through if a rumor is about historical injustices against certain populations. I think you can look at that population and see, okay, this population is going to, you know, reflect back on some of their historical experiences and see that reflected in the current rumor that they're seeing. So that's kind of what I'm talking about there. Oh.
I'm gonna just ask from here. Look, I'm gonna. All right. I'm sort of just hearing kind of Bryant's point and others and thinking about where we are with our resources right now and how they've changed over time. I guess one of the questions I have about the playbook and the associated materials is based off of the idea that we've gone through, you know, scarcity mindset pre-COVID. Public health's never been well funded. I think about when I worked at NHO before, and I was looking at public health Seattle King County as this cool health department out in Seattle. I'd never been to Seattle. I didn't know anything about Washington State, but they were doing all this stuff around preparedness and equity, and got here and they're talking about this language access stuff. And but there was no funding for it. There was no money for it. And then the doors opened during COVID, and really great programs and infrastructure were built in that I imagine, and I'm interested, colleagues are here, former colleagues in the room, you know, just one example that happens to be on my head. Some things were allowed to continue or had support for continuing, and other things may be more difficult. Can think about that in probably a range of health departments around this room. In the playbook, when you talk about all these strategies, does it help in terms of getting into, with some discrete amount of resources, whether it's funding or political will, how do you balance things that, particularly when we think about language access is on my mind in the moment, those vehicles that are around going through media channels, platforms, partners to reach certain populations or trusted messengers versus the large networks, you know, or whatever the larger platforms are. Does this help us kind of think through some of those pros and cons?
Yeah, and it was designed to be useful to a health department with a single communications person, up to a health department, a very well-resourced health department with multiple people. And there's you know, each section has like, if you have more time and resources, right, you could do these things. But, you know, I think the other thing that we've been thinking about recently, are there ways to make these materials that we create shareable? And, you know, that's kind of like the holy grail of communications work, right? That can I make what I produce here useful over here? I asked a question earlier in the data session to say, like, are these systems interoperable? Can we share? And that's still, I think, a thing that's very difficult for folks to do. But as we lose resources, as resources become more scarce, I think willingness to share materials, make them modifiable, and that sort of thing is going to be something that we're going to have to rely on. Yeah.
Hi, Allie Levy with King County Public Health, she, her. We had a conversation at lunch about how long it will be before we have trusted institutions at the national level again in the public health space. And I'm looking for a message of hope. And I was wondering if you have evidence that if I, apply these strategies and I decide to trust something from my local health department today, will that make me more likely to trust something else they say tomorrow? Is this work cumulative? Is a question that I have for you.
I think it is cumulative. It's this, relationship. It's like building a relationship, right? It's a relationship that we build time over time. There's a dialogue that is had. I think the bad side of that is that, you can lose it pretty quickly too, which we have done. But I think it is cumulative. I think the more good work we do, the more people will trust, and people are committed to that road back to trust. And I think that, if you look at some of the Pew and Kaiser Family Foundation polling, people still trust science, people still trust expertise. So I think, it feels bad right now, but I think that we still have a good foundation to move forward from. One of the projects that I'm working on, it's being led by a colleague, Crystal Watson. We're thinking through, okay, what does public health preparedness look like, in its ideal form, like 5 years from now? We have an opportunity. Maybe we will think about, if we have to rebuild, can we rebuild without the institutional baggage that we've had to deal with old systems and ways of doing things? So thinking ahead of, like, how are we going to rebuild this, and how are we going to have a system that works? So I think that there are things in the works right now that are thinking ahead towards the sort of hopefully brighter times, and I'm looking forward to them.
Cool. Okay. Well,
All right.
thank you so much. A round of applause for Dr. Phillips.